Thank you, everyone, for coming out on a very wonderful day in Tokyo. My name is June Park, and I'm a political economist currently based in South Korea. Today, I'd like to convey a finalized version of a paper that was recently published in Washington based on my cumulative research of the past year observing Moon Jae-in, the South Korean president's nuclear and renewable energy policies in South Korea. The story that I'd like to convey to you today is not about something against renewable energy. I am not a opposing person toward renewable energy per se. What I'd like to sort of flesh out in my presentation is how you implement renewable energy policy is really important, and South Korea is going about it in the very wrong way possible. So I'd like to begin very briefly touching upon what we're talking about here, why it's important to consider renewable energy in ways of trade policy. Just for those of you who are not familiar with trade issues, and some jargons up there regarding trade remedy is presented. So anti-dumping is when a country comes and dumps products that is lesser than fair value than their home market prices. Countervailing duty is when governments subsidize products to be cheaper than competitive market prices. And safeguard is when you protect your home industries from imports coming abroad to your own home market. And these are some pictures just for you to see how cells and panels are constructed, just to have a feel of what solar panels actually look like. The way in which this works, and I'm sure that our engineering professors would explain to you in a much more technical manner, but basically solar panels are using the power of solar light to come onto a panel, and that reflection creates an electricity that could be used for our everyday use. And by far, China has been at the forefront of developing solar technology. As you can see here, China, United States, Asia and the Middle East are potential markets for solar energy implementation, but right now, China is at the forefront. This is a solar power plant in Datong in China, and basically the Chinese government has been providing lots of government subsidy for solar panel industries to thrive, not just domestically, but also internationally. Another panda there. So there are several of these throughout China, and they've been very successful implementing this. So as you see, as you know, there is a big trade war of the history of humankind between the United States and China at the moment, and there are negotiations as we speak. And actually, last year, the onset of this trade war started with the US safeguard on Chinese and South Korean solar panels. So what's really important to recognize here is that China is going to continue to push for renewable energy issues, and solar is at the forefront. Basically, overview-wise, I'd like to sort of throw this research question: why does the US safeguard on solar panels propose challenges for South Korea? So I'm looking at the South Korean case in the most concrete way possible. And the argument here is that the impact on South Korea's solar panel production exports, and there is an impact there, and the complications with renewable 30-20 policy that Moon Jae-in administration is pushing for is a little bit too hard on South Korean producers. And through my findings on the impact of the safeguard, South Korean energy mix, and the difficulties of matching the energy trilemma, the impact on the domestic solar industry will all be fleshed out in this presentation. And then I'll deliver some policy recommendations. So the argument here is that there are impacts on South Korean solar panel photovoltaics, PV is photovoltaics, production and exports. Basically, the safeguards are intended to target Chinese and South Korean solar panels. But this creates complications within not just the US production and installation market, but also South Korean market. right after the South Korean reception of the US safeguard, what has been decided is that South Korean firms will relocate to Georgia in the United States in order to avoid tariffs. Meanwhile, China has cut subsidies, but there is a revitalization of the Chinese government's intent to bring about more subsidization to renewable energy sectors. Prices have fallen for the solar photovoltaics, but it may go up on the rise when subsidies do not get provided to the Chinese solar producers. The complications with Moon Jae-in's renewable policy is that there is no consideration for cost. There is fundamental concentration on environmental impact. And the ambitious goals that is pushing South Korean solar panels out of the South Korean territory in terms of competition is also a problematic matter. And lastly, there is the issue of public opinion, and we'll touch upon that briefly. So the safeguard has come about after a series of trade remedy measures by the United States, but the most recent one has brought about backlash from China and South Korea, and the biggest responses have been counter-WTO disputes by China and South Korea. As you can see here, there is reason for the United States to be worried about this because China and South Korean panels are coming onto the United States. And there is an aggregate impact as well. If you see over here, potentially the scenario looks like the US would continuously be affected by imported solar panels. In terms of installation, though, there are installation jobs that are immensely affected by this safeguard because there are not enough solar panels coming into the United States, but that would change as companies move to the United States. If I briefly touch upon the energy mix in South Korea and also the energy trilemma, this is based on figures that are published mainly by the World Energy Congress. Let me just flesh out a little bit about the Moon Jae-in administration's efforts. What is not of dispute at all is that South Korea needs to diversify its energy sources. It has been very much reliant on nuclear power generation since 1980s and 70s. And since his term coming into office, he has promoted this idea of letting go of nuclear as much as possible. And here are some of his plans in trying to let go of the nuclear energy sector. So his proposal is by 2030, you would significantly increase the amount of renewable energy as opposed to what we have right now. And this kind of proposal is, in and of itself, on the surface, it's something that is commendable. However, the details are missing in regards to how to facilitate R&D for small and medium-sized enterprises, as well as how to strengthen the markets of South Korean production and for global marketization for these firms to be active on the global market. Instead, what is coming about is that there is a large amount of Chinese dumped solar panels coming into South Korea just to meet his targets for renewable energy. So again, there's no need to emphasize that China has a huge market share in this area. Also here, in terms of renewable energy production, China is at the forefront. What's really necessary for South Korea to take on in terms of energy mix balancing is the consideration for not just environmental sustainability, but also cost and the stability in terms of provision. So here, South Korea has been, this is up until, I think, 2018, when the figures were not reflected in total, the massive heat wave that we had in South Korea this past summer. But still, this gives you a sense of how South Korea lacks in certain areas in the energy trilemma. So focusing on cost itself, it's possible when you have different kinds of, not just renewable energy, but different kinds of renewable energy sources, plus LNG, plus nuclear, everything combined together, you could have a more balanced share. However, what South Korea lacks in the current mix is the consideration for economic cost and stability. South Korea relies still heavily on fossil fuel. The nuclear phase out is now heavily debated amongst the public. Certain polls are showing that 60 to 70% of people in South Korea are longing for nuclear power plants to be reinstated. And if we look into the renewables, South Korea is coming into this game pretty late than other players, and the percentage is quite small compared to other countries in the OECD. So as you can see, only since 2011 or so have South Korean renewable energy started to really take up in terms of speed and in terms of implementation. So the Moon Jae-in administration is pressured time-wise in order to implement this at the world level possible. And there is continuous worries regarding the microfine dust coming into South Korea, not just from China, but also generated mainly by South Korean coal power plants and the use of fossil fuel. So this is one of the days that you could easily see in South Korea. So in order to come up with a strategy to overcome these environmental issues, renewable energy definitely is a solution, but how to go about it is really the question. The impact on the domestic solar industry is as follows. So right on top, so you see Chinese companies really thriving on the global stage in terms of solar production. There are Korean companies as well, but there is no guarantee that this kind of competitive manner would be guaranteed. Competitive performance by South Korean firms would be guaranteed. Most of these companies are Chinese firms. Only one or two are by South Korea and Taiwan. And since Moon's renewable energy 30-20 policy implementation, most of the imported panels that are coming into South Korea are Chinese panels. So you see most of them in red, imports, and exports have not been so much vibrant. And South Korea has been implementing ways in which it could deploy solar panels into households and whatnot. These are some of the examples. This is a map of Seoul. There are numerous housings and real estates trying to implement solar panels on the rise. There are regulatory mechanisms that are starting to take place, but there are no regulatory mechanisms as to how to go about disputes in solar panel installations and how to really effectively measure the quality of the solar panels before installation. These are some of the massive ones in South Korea's solar farms. And this is a bike path that is covered by solar panels. And recently, the Moon administration has launched an initiative to plant a solar panel farm in the reclaimed land of Saemangum, and it is being met with severe political backlash. Meanwhile, we see that this saga would not be the end. We would see much more global competitive market behavior with regard to China, Europe, Japan also, India, many of these solar producers vying for competition on the global market where South Korean companies will lose competitive advantage over the years if there is no stable renewable policy enacted by the government. So I'll skip this for a sec and go on to the policy recommendations, which is really important. On the solar panel exports by South Korea, really the diversification of export destination is vital. And the relocation of production facilities just to the United States, it's unavoidable, but it will happen. And for small and medium-sized enterprises in South Korea, R&D is essential to their development in terms of going about this trade war. And on the South Korean energy mix and renewables, balancing this energy trilemma seems to be a very important assignment for the South Korean government. Reconsidering the balancing of the energy mix is really important for this Moon Jae-in's Renewable 30-20 policy, which is not really considered as important by the government at the moment. Right now, the concentration is completely on North Korea. And the deregulation of installation laws may be a priority for the Moon Jae-in administration, but you should take this with a grain of salt because there is no actual conducting of installation costs or how much feed-in tariffs would actually play into the South Korean market. Such calculations would have to come in before the government actually goes into a thorough implementation of these policies. And lastly, the institutional mechanism is really vital for this government before they go on to wind and solar farm installations. Without these, it's highly likely that installation will bring about a large set of problems in the future in South Korea. So these are some of, this is the finalized paper that was published earlier this month. You are free to access it, and the original presentation in DC is also on YouTube for you to be able to see. And if you are interested also on Japan and South Korea's import of natural gas from the GCC, I would recommend this co-authored work by me and my colleague Emma Ashford at Cato Institute. And you would be able to see what kind of energy dilemmas that these countries are facing at the moment. Thank you very much.